here. Welcome to Porsche Talk Podcast. You might find me on various social media under Marc and Cars, and as usual, joined by Ajmal.
Hello, I'm Ajmal, Flat Cap Driver on Instagram and sometimes on YouTube. And we're here again on our Porsche Talk Podcast talking nonsense.
We have someone pretty exciting for you, I reckon, Ajmal, as a guest.
Yeah, I've been, campaigning to get this guest on. And here he is, Magnus.
Hi, mate. Good day, Marc. Good day, Ishmael. How you doing?
Great. It's great to have you on.
From downtown LA. It's like a global affair right now.
It is. And
like all three corners of the world. Brits abroad and all that.
Well, we've had a few people on that you know. We've had Bart on, who messaged you. We've had Lara, that Porsche girl, on. We've had Brock, 996 Road Trip. You probably saw him at Concours d'Elegance recently. We've been campaigning for ages to get you on. And obviously, being a Brit abroad, I've wanted to quiz you on what it's like being a Brit abroad. But we're very grateful for you to take the time to come and talk to us.
Well, thanks for campaigning. It was just a simple email. That was all it is. So happy to be here. Happy to talk whatever it is we're going to talk about. Down under, fish and chips, Porsches, whatever it may be, cars and coffee. So let's rock and roll.
Let's start with Down Under. You've been here a couple of times.
I've watched a lot of Mel Gibson films, Crocodile Dundee, AC/DC. I've been down under twice. I went down there first time in 2016 to Sydney for the Rent Sport reunion down at Sydney Motorsports. Sydney's a great town. It was weird. When I first went there, I'd seen all these, sort of Mad Max type films, and I thought Australia was real outlaw, Crocodile Dundee. And then I get to Sydney, and Sydney's, beautiful town, city, reminded me of if LA and San Francisco had a baby, just really beautiful, old Victorian homes. Of course, I did an outlaw gathering under the bridge. I drove to Bathurst. I went to Sydney Motorsports Pack. But what really got me about Australia were the speed cameras everywhere. This whole Mad Max outlaw fever thing. I'm like, it does not exist there. I drove from Sydney to Bathurst on that Belzer Park Parkway that goes over
great road.
Nowhere. And there's speed cameras on that road.
Yeah, and it's pretty
What's
tragic.
With all the speed cameras down under?
It's a police state. What do I say? It's pretty disappointing. And I think that would explain why every time I listen to anyone or watch a video of anyone in LA, everybody's driving as they would like to in the canyons, but every time you can't do it here in Australia. And the only places you can.
No, that was my biggest surprise. I mean, the road, that Belzer Pine Parkway, which goes to Bathurst, is such an awesome road. But it was like, I sort of got it in Sydney, even though, see, the great thing about LA is there are no speed cameras here. But Sydney, it was like everywhere you went, and I ended up making a video called Aussie Outlaw that started at Auto House Hamilton in Sydney and drove to Bathurst. I did a lap of Bathurst and then drove back. But we did a shot going over the Sydney Harbour Bridge with a drone, but just getting on and off that bridge was kind of tricky, just to loop around and come back and go over it. But it was a great experience. The Rent Sport reunion at Sydney Motorsports Park was great, but the culture and the crowd and the people in Sydney, I did an outlaw gathering under that Sydney bridge by the Opera House. It was just mega. And then I went back, I guess, in 2019, and I drove across Australia from Perth all the way across in a Porsche Cayenne Expedition. And once you get out of the cities, you don't have to get more than 30 miles from the coast. There's just a whole lot of nothing except dead kangaroos. And driving all the way across there, we went over the Big Red Rock, went through the Simpson Desert. I guess it's Simpson Desert, Ayers Rock, went to Uluru, went to the big, what's the big rock? Not Ayers Rock, right? It's a big mountain. We went there. So, it was a fascinating place for sure.
Big road.
So, Marc, one of the things that we wanted to talk to Magnus about it just leads on nicely, is about the thing. So in LA, there is this, you watch any videos, you see anybody on social media, they're filming themselves out and about, whether it's during the night, during the day. And you know that they're holding the camera, they're filming themselves, they're filming the road, they're filming other road users. And I'm just there going, if I did that in the UK, someone would report me and there'd be a knock at the door, I'd get arrested. How does that work in LA?
Well, completely different environment. I suppose in a way, it's the ultimate freedom to sort of go wherever you want and do whatever you want, weirdly. People tend to think America's super controlled and restricted, but it's not really. It's the Wild West out here. I was super surprised in Australia with the stories I just told. Whenever I go to England, I'm like just super surprised how restricted it is there. One of my all-time most annoying drives, like the drive across Australia in the Cayenne, top 10 drive. I also have an awesome drive down in Colombia from Bogota to Medellin in a Porsche Cayenne, top 10 drive. One of my most irritating drives is actually in England from Goodwood to Sheffield on a Sunday. Porsche Cars GB had loaned me, whatever the current car was back then. This is circa 2017, I guess. And I went to Goodwood, Festival of Speed, and I left on a Sunday. So you know how this story is going to end up. I left Goodwood around 3 on a Sunday and drove to Sheffield. And talk about a most annoying drive. First of all, just getting out of Goodwood down those little country lanes with caravans and tractors, and no one lets you pass. Then getting on the motorway, finding my way to the M1 with this restricted average speed where, the camera tags you coming in and you have to do no more than 35 miles an hour for 50 miles. And there's, all the road is bollard off, but no one's working because it's England on a Sunday, right? So there's no road works there. There's cameras everywhere. It was about a 6-hour drive. I don't know how many miles it was. It wasn't actually that as far as you think, because England, obviously, you can fit it into California. I'm used to doing, like recently we drove from LA to Moab. It's 800 miles. We took the scenic route. We stopped off in a few places and we did it in 12 hours. And we weren't necessarily speeding, but we covered 800 miles, multiple states, stopped off. We did it in 12 hours. In England, for me to go 200 miles on a Sunday afternoon with these restricted speeds, it was just the most irritating thing. And in England, it's in LA, you can sort of drive wherever you want on the freeway. There is no fast lane, slow lane, overtaking lane. You can weave wherever you want. So if you're a spirited driver, you duck and weave and ice. And in England, no one allows you to do that. They get all upset if you're in the right-hand lane for too long, you don't pull back in, and they're flashing you with the lights. There's a lot more road rage, I find, in England than there is in anywhere I've driven in America. And what I also find in England is people get really upset if you try and pull a move and cut in front of them. They would sooner run into you rather than let you in. This is in my experience. In LA, people say LA are bad drivers. I suppose to a certain degree that element is everywhere. But there aren't the restrictions that I've just described of speed cameras, in the middle of nowhere. That doesn't really happen here. I grew up in Sheffield. We've got this great road called the Snake. It goes from Sheffield basically over the Pennines, past Ladybound, drops down into Glossop. It's the fun shortcut to Manchester. There's now speed cameras on this road. So, LA, California, for the most part, anywhere in the States at this point in time, they don't have speed cameras. So you're just able to slice and dice and do what you want with more freedom. Now, granted, there's this crazy street takeover thing that's happening now that you might have seen with cars and bikes basically blocking intersections and doing donuts and wheelers and all that type of stuff. And, that does seem a little crazy, but just a completely different environment, super not restricted. And so to me, that is like, I always talk about the freedom is getting out and driving, going wherever you want to go at whatever pace you want to go at. And, I spent 19 years in Sheffield and I've been in LA since 1986. So 36 years in LA, 19 years in England. So I'm more Americanized than I am Anglophile, even though I'm still dual citizen, UK passport. But it always surprises me when I talk to anyone in England or anyone in Europe. First of all, We can drive 365 days a year here in LA, in Southern California. No one's putting their car away in October, November for the winter. That doesn't exist. No one's swapping over to winter snow tires. That doesn't exist. So ultimately for a car guy, LA is the car culture capital of the world, in my experience. There are more accessibility to world-class driving roads, ocean, desert, mountain. You can do it in a day. Some parts of the world, you might have one or two of those elements, but you won't have all three of them in a drivable 200-mile radius that you'll have in here. Then factor in cool cars, just a common here. Every sort of car company has got some presence here. And when it comes to building, within 50 miles of where I'm sat, you can get whatever you want built, fabricated, powder-coated, chrome-plated, painted, manufactured, 3D printed. You don't have to, it amazes me how stuff gets done in England, because normally the scenario that a specialty independent company that's more often than not located in a cool old converted farmhouse down a dirt country road in the middle of nowhere. But, somehow they get stuff done, but it's just a different environment here in LA.
Do you find... Sorry, go on, Marc.
Well, I was just going to say, because there's the thing, whenever you see the car programs that are based out of the US, when, Fast and Loud or whatever it might be, even when Wheeler Dealers was over there, that they just within walking distance of where their workshop was, there was a machine shop. You can get anything made. And you're right, over here, everything's so difficult and so expensive. And sometimes you think, what's the point? And with the roads the way they are, they've done this thing now, even though, and I totally get that journey up the M1. I used to go to Leeds for work quite a lot, and I used to go up that M1, and it was just the most boring, mind-numbing 50-mile-an-hour drive that I ever had. But now what they've done is they've made smart motorways. And it means that even where there's no roadworks, no restrictions, there's still cameras everywhere when you need to do 70 miles an hour. But I'm very lucky. I live out in the sticks, and there's country lanes right on my doorstep. But I've got that other thing that you just mentioned. My car is in storage because it's been in storage for the winter, and I still haven't taken it out. Although I do need to ask you, actually, Magnus, because my car is a 1966 Porsche 912.
Oh, congrats.
What's your opinion on those? Mine's a left-hand drive. It's Italian delivered, and I love it. But because you're pure 911, and I remember you said that you wanted one of each from 64 to 73.
Right.
But do you have any experience of a 912? Because I know Jerry Seinfeld keeps going on about how brilliant they are.
Yeah, I've had a few. I've restored a few. I always start off a 912 related question this way. I've restored two or three of them. One of them was a light ivory 3-gauge 65. I restored a 66 Aga Blue. I've had a bunch of them because when I started collecting stuff, I was really into short wheelbase cars. You could pick 912s up for nothing. I mean, this was when I was buying 911s for $4,500, $7,500. So 912s, I bought one for $2,500, which was the Aga Blue one that I restored. And the point to my ramble is, from a restoration point of view, they cost the exact same amount of money as a 911 to restore. You sort of go in a little naive thinking, well, it's a 4-banger, right? It's got to cost less than a 6-banger, but in reality, they don't. And as you know, everything else, pretty much for the most part, is the same as 911. So from a restoration point of view, they cost you the exact same amount of money. If you're doing it for pleasure, it doesn't matter. If people are doing it for a business, amount of money, but you don't get the money back. But that aside, the driving pleasure of a 912 is they're all really fun, nimble little cars. So I've owned a few. For me, I've never kept them though. I always keep the 911s. For me, the perfect combo of a 912 is what I call the 912-6. And that's when someone takes a 912 that you bought for $2,500, and then you mat it to that, 2.4 motor that you bought on a pallet for like $2,500 as well. And you put the two and two together, and then you got a fun hot rod. So 20 years ago, there was a lot of that type of stuff out there. I've bought a lot of oddball cars because, 20, 25 years ago, when these cars were basically not worth much, I had a 67S. I had 5 67Ss at one time. I'm now down at 2. But I just pick them up. And a lot of them I was buying inexpensively because there weren't numbers matching motors. And the story would sort of be a familiar story. 25, 30 years ago, someone needs an engine rebuild in a 67S. And unless you were a real purist, you didn't really care. It might be one of those scenarios where I can rebuild the original motor for 10 grand. It's going to take 6 months. Or I've got this 2.4T motor in the corner that I can drop in for 2 grand and you can have it next week. And it won't be quite as, won't be quite the same, but yet you'll be back on the road for less money. So there was a lot of that happening with everything, especially 912s. So, I've owned 912s that had 914 motors in it. I've owned 912s that have got 912 motors in it. I've bought 912s with no motors for parts cars that I've cut up and used them on early 911s. I have a 3-gauge 65 912 in my warehouse about 100 feet away, which is non-adjustable shocks, really early 65, that I think I got for like $800 just as a parts car, that I've been cutting off front clips, rear quarters. So, I always say, it always annoys the 912 guys, but I always say 912s make great parts for 911s, great parts cars for 911s. But I am joking. 912 is obviously a fun, nimble cars to drive. For me, I just need a little more acceleration than what the average 912 has, especially if you end up with a 4-speed 912. They're not quite as much fun. Sure. But they are great because you can drive them sort of 9/10 all the time. It's what I call a flat foot car where there's just enough power for it to be usable all the time. And I've always been more of a less is more type of guy anyway when it comes to anything that I've built. I'm not so much dropping the biggest horsepower motor. I'm more about sticky tires, good brakes, handling, and maximize what I call the flat foot capability. So from that point of view, 912s are great because you can sort of drive them 9/10 all the time, which you sort of have to do if you want to be on boil and make pace, in my experience, with a 912.
Yeah,
sorry, along those lines, Magnus, in the police states that both Ajmal and I live in, I've got a 356B, by the way, and one of the main reasons is for that flat foot experience you just mentioned. And I can do that in Australia without all those speed cameras hitting me up all the time, and it happens up to 60 mile an hour. It's a whole, bag of fun. But once you get into the, a hot rodded 911 or even a modern water-cooled 911, you're dealing with another stratosphere of 150, up 80 to 110 mile an hour. And then that's when the police cameras, they really do like raising revenue at that point.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm all about the flat foot capability. And you sort of hit the nail on the head of, everything that's coming out of every factory today is just way too much power for the availability of open, trouble, risk-free road. You talked about speed cameras, right? I'm sat next to a GT2 back there. I don't know if you can see it, 2002 GT2. 20 years ago, this was king of the hill. It was Porsche's most performance-orientated car. 2-wheel drive manual, 450-ish horsepower. Today, that's one step above base level of a 992 C2, right? Same spec, 2-wheel drive manual, 450 horsepower. But it's one step above base model. The new King of the Hill Turbo S, 750 horsepower. But yet, where can you utilize that really? I mean, triple-digit speeds come up so quick today in modern cars, but they feel so insulated that 60 to 80 in your 912 that's rolling around on the 165/70 profile tire on a 4.5-inch wheel feels way more exciting than a $150 in a 992 does, right? So back to 912, you're having a lot of fun under triple-digit speed. They don't really go much above. And if they do, they're just like a buzz saw rattling and shaking around. So, it's kind of horses for courses, really.
Yeah, because I like that. Because that's exactly it. Because my 912, I'm driving it flat out all over the place. The smell, the noise, the slight terror of you're not completely in control, but you love it, and you're not risking your license, your life, the lives of others.
We can talk all about 912s, right? They cover all the 5 senses. You just said it. It's the smell, the sound, the feel, the vibration, the sight, the nostalgia, the emotion. It covers all those emotions. The new cars, they'll cover two of those emotions. You don't really smell a new car, right? You know, it's new car smell. You don't get out of it and reek of odor, oil, and gas, which you will. You know, it's like spilt coffee, sort of burnt rubber, moldy carpet, bit of rust, and then oil and gasoline just permeates every environment that you're in a vintage car. So, you know, that to me is emotional connection to all things that are vintage, that are soul and character. And that's the one thing Porsche, they can't manufacture that and put it in a cup and go, here's soul and emotion. You know, they can go, okay, here's paint to sample spirulina green. You can paint your latest whatever in spirulina green and we'll call it a rare shade and it'll be awesome, right? And everyone will get all excited about it and, you know, tell all the friends at the Cars and Coffee that it was paint to sample spirulina green, but it's not quite the same emotion. And to me, what's great about cars that I'm into, mostly Porsches, but there's a few other things, you know, it's an emotional connection to an environment that a new car, I don't think delivers to the same degree.
Now, I agree with that.
I don't think, hang on, I've got to interrupt this. This is, look, both here. I think we've got to overlook the most important thing in this conversation that the listeners can't see, and that is the fact that Magnus has a bottle of water with spirulina mix in it right next to him right now.
I don't think...
Way to stay healthy right there.
Yeah. It's your breakfast, isn't it?
I got spirulina, I got coffee.
I can see that, yeah. They're balancing each other out.
Water, coffee and a water. You got to stay hydrated. You know, you got to keep your beard fluffed.
Yeah.
Part of my morning routine, you got to walk the dog. Yesterday, I got almost 16,000 steps in. That's quite a lot of steps.
It is a big
Here's non-paint to sample spirulina green.
I'm glad it isn't a paint sample that you're drinking right now.
It's my pet peeve, this whole paint to sample, special wishes. You know, it's like, to me, I go to Cars and Coffee, right? You know, one of my craziest stories, this is probably circa 20, I don't know, 14, 15, 16, you know, when lava orange was the must-have color. You know, I was once down in Florida. I go to Champion Porsche. It's America's largest Porsche dealer at the time. They have a Cars and Coffee. I counted 24 GT3s, 24 of them, right? So they're pretty common. 12 of them were lava orange. It goes, this is nothing special, nothing rare. It's quite common. What stands out in a sea of 24 paint to sample, special wishes, rare shades? Show me one that's white, right? One that's white with no options. That's the rare car. I don't know how it is in your part of the world, but here everyone's hung up on their paint to sample, special wishes. I'm so special with my rare shade. But the real special one is the guy that just ordered one with no options. That's the one that stands out when people just love to sit around at Cars and Coffees kicking tires, not really putting miles on their car because they don't want to devalue them, right? You know, it's got to be low mileage. You know, I recently acquired something I never thought I would own. 991 Turbo S. Wasn't on my radar. I was looking for a 997 Turbo. You know, got to have one of every model, but not in chronological order. Sometimes I'm into it, sometimes I'm not. But, you know, I get a hard on, got to have a 997 Turbo. I ask around. My buddy Paul Kramer, Auto Kennel, who if you ever want a car, you go to him, goes, I got something you're going to want, 991 Turbo S. I go, nah, I'm not really interested. It wasn't even on my radar. I'd driven them, but never wanted to own one because it's a new Porsche to me. He goes, well, you're going to want this one. I go, why? He goes, well, it's one owner. It's got 161,000 miles on the clock, and its pennies on the dollar. But it has 50 pages of invoices. Whatever this car needed, the guy did. It wasn't like four bros thrashing the shit out of it, really smoking it. It was one mature owner that lived in Newport Beach, commuted to Beverly Hills freeway miles. He'd replaced the transmission 2 years prior when it had 120,000 miles on it. Wasn't under warranty. I guess the guy didn't like to use the brakes. He just preferred to downshift. And so, you know, transmission wasn't covered by a warranty. That was a 30 grand invoice for him. Anyway, I ended up buying it for pennies on the dollar. rollout factory, rhodium silver metallic, red leather interior. And when I first got it, I didn't really love it. I didn't get out of it and look over my shoulder. Yeah, it did triple digit speeds, but it's everything we just talked about. I wasn't emotionally connected to it. It didn't seem unique. There's a bunch of them in LA. It was pretty disposable, sort of. It was an appliance. I called it my fast grocery getter appliance. But that trip to Moab, Utah, 800 miles in one day, didn't get out feeling beat up. My ears weren't ringing. My back didn't ache. My leg wasn't numb. I probably wouldn't want to do that driving a day in an air-cooled. Probably wouldn't want to do it in a GT3 because you'd be like, shaken to death with the stiffness of it. And I finally realized for me, this is where a car such as a 991 Turbo S really excels. But the interesting point to it was when I started looking after I'd bought it, I go, I should just see what the market value of these cars are. And the average one I found had no more than 30,000 miles on it. And they were twice the price of what I paid for it. So it just goes to show no one wants a high mileage modern Porsche. That 996 GT2 I talked about, similar story. I'm the third owner, lifelong LA car, but I bought it was about 90,000 miles on it. Brought the price way down. So, the bargains to be had out there if you don't care about mileage. And to me, this is a perfect example. I had a couple of buddies who had same spec car, but with 20, 25, 30,000 miles, which is average. Same price point, doubled what I paid for it. So it's like there are bargains to be had. And I sometimes think, like my 90,000 mile GT2 is really in no worse condition than my buddy's 25,000 mile one because it got driven. It actually drove the same. It wasn't like any inferior performance. It was just, there's some miles on the clock. And the point to my ramble, I suppose, is I always used to say the great thing about Porsche is you see a lot of high mileage Porsches because they were built to be driven. People bought them and drove them. This was true up to probably 10, 15 years ago. Now there's a new wave of Porsche ownership coming in where, like I've sort of been rambling about, people don't want to put miles on their car. I go, well, weren't they built to be driven? I get it. You own it. You can do whatever you want. It's like a piece of art. You don't have to drive it. But there is a trend of, I don't want to put miles on the car. I don't want to devalue it. Isn't the value in miles per mile not what it may be when you eventually sell it? Memorable moments. I'm all about that. The memorable moments, the miles per mile, the stories. When people want to show me their car with no miles on it, I got no interest in it. What's the point, right? To me, I love hearing the stories about you get pulled over or you broke down or you went on this epic road trip or it's a journey, right? The memories. They're only made by putting miles on the cars.
Yeah,
along that
absolutely,
topic, Magnus, a car, this will link in quite nicely to some background for all of us, but about 2002, it would have been, I was fortunate enough I was driving across the top of Italy into France and we pulled in just outside of Briançon in the Alps, the French Alps there, me and a friend of mine in a hire car. It was a Fiat or something like that. And as we're there, a white, completely plastered in dirt, flogged, pinging away, ripping through the mountains and then pulled up at the same place where we stopped to get a coffee, was a Countach, Lamborghini Countach. It was the only time I'd ever seen a Countach actually driven the way I'm sure that the Lamborghini designers would have loved seeing the car. And it was so, I went and had a look, took some photos back with my old digital camera back then, and the car was a white one, but it looked grey. There was that much road grime on it. So I'll go and have a look, because the scissor door was up because the guy was out getting a coffee, poked my nose in. 170,000 kilometres on a Countach.
Wow, that's nuts on a Countach. Wow.
Yeah, I couldn't even believe it. To give you some perspective, Ajmal, that's 100,000 miles. Okay, and just seeing a Countach getting used like that, only one I've ever seen in my life that actually isn't pristine, and that's some hard cars too, because those cars are not easy to get in and out of and drive.
Right,
Absolutely.
Yeah. I've driven a Countach. It's like we'll all sort of have that fantasy for a minute of a Countach. I drove one. It was like, I don't know if I'd want one, but
it was on my
I do remember the drive. For me, it was awkward. I was too big. My head was almost hitting the windshield. Couldn't really get my feet under the pedal.
Yeah.
It didn't seem as nimble and fast as I thought it was going to be. But of course, you had all the attention in the world on you, which is not always what you want either. But yeah, props to the bro for driving.
I was blown away. It was a Belgian guy, actually, who was on Belgian plates back then. But look, the reason I brought it up, Countach was my poster car. Like, you know, growing up, I had that, I had a Daytona and a 930, which leads me into your story about how the 930 impacted you the first time, you know, your introduction to Porsche was.
Well, I've told that story a million times. It's, you know, I'm 10 years old. I go to the London Olds Court Motor Show with my dad, Porsche 930 Turbo on the stand, white, martini stripe. End up coming back from that London Olds Court Motor Show. I had the poster, the brochure. I wrote a letter to Porsche saying, hey, I want to design for you. True story. They wrote me back a few months later, essentially sent me some programs, brochures, and little letter said, essentially, call, you know, we appreciate your passion for the brand or whatever it was. But the main part to the story was, you know, call us when you're older, which of course I never did. But when I think of Porsche, I do think of the iconic shape, you know, the 930 Turbo. It's been out in constant production since 1975. This is actually a 75 Turbo right there that I'm sat next to. That's a 77. So for me, you know, similar story. I think any kid growing up anywhere in the, you know, 70s or 80s, chances are you had those three cars on your wall that you just mentioned. I was no different. You know what I mean? It's interesting that sort of the last hurrah for what appears to possibly be the internal combustion engine is everything other than, you know, the GT3 is really a turbo, right? You know, you've got the non-turbo turbos, the Carreras and the Carrera S's, which Porsche can't call them turbos because turbo just means top-level marketing now. It doesn't mean forced induction of an internal combustion engine from exhaust gases, right? Because, hey, they can put a turbo badge on a Taycan, right? So the concept of turbocharging is a little bit like, you know, in the 80s when you could get a turbo hairdryer or a turbo razor or whatever it is. So to me, I like boost. You know, these early turbos, by today's standards, they have no power. They're a little bit like the 912 in that sense of, in US spec, 240, rest of the world spec, 260 horsepower. This is nothing today, right? This is no power. Factor in, as we know, turbo lag, factor in tall gears. You know, the problem with early turbos really, other than turbo lag, are tall gear ratios. You know, first gear 50, second gear 90, third gear 120, fourth is the rest. You're always sort of in the wrong gear. You know, I tell this story all the time. You're cruising on the freeway doing, call it 70 in fourth gear. You shift down a third, there's nothing really. You almost have to shift down to second at like 60, 65 miles an hour, which is just completely opposite of what you'd ever do in a normally aspirated whatever car, right? You'd be in third or fourth gear, just blip the throttle, drop it, away you go. Not in an early turbo. If you're not in that small window of boost, which there's nothing below 3,000 RPM. So if you're chugging away in fourth gear, you cannot get down quick enough into the power back. So you really drive a turbo on boost, you never really short shift them. It's almost like you need to be in second gear on the freeway doing 70 if you want to have a chance of actually having some acceleration. You can't be caught in fourth gear doing 70 at like 2,000 RPM because you'll never get into the boost range. The similar story is cruising around town. You pretty much, second gear will do everything in a turbo because, you know, you come to a stop in second gear doing, call it rolling, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 miles an hour. You got to go down to first. You can't blip the throttle clutch in. You go try and go around the corner in second gear in a 3-liter early turbo at 20 miles an hour and accelerate out. You could walk out of the corner quicker. So the challenge with turbos is you always have to think RPM boost gear ratio. And, you know, so things like downshifting to first, unless you're a rally driver on a really tight hairpin, you're never doing that in any other 911. But in a turbo, you got to go from second to first in an early 4-speed one. So, you know, they're not necessarily great cars in the canyons, like my favorite twisty road, the Crest. The gear ratio is always slightly too tall for the rev RPM of the turns, you know. So they're an iconic car, and I love them. And they're a challenging car to actually hustle around at speed. because of everything I just said. And then factor in the brakes are not good. For whatever reason, even on sticky Hoosier rubber, they don't stop good. And they're not a heavy car. It's got the same caliper as you'd have on a 24S or a 73 Carrera, which stops great on those cars that weigh about 2,200 pounds. These don't really weigh a ton more, but they just don't stop good. And then they tend to, early 3-liter non-intercooled cars, they tend to run hot, even when you're not on boost. So you're constantly watching the temp gauge if you're stuck in traffic. Any other car I've got, even thrashing the shit out of it, they don't get above 210. But an early turbo stuck in traffic, you see 240, 250 quite often. And then you start sweating a little bit as, this thing's getting hot. And nothing's cooling it. It's just, it's like a pressure cooker of temperature. So that's my experience on 3-liter turbos and Porsche's use of the word turbo when they put it on an electric Taycan.
No, I get what you're saying about the long gears, because I've also got a 996, just a base Carrera, 996 manual. And like you say, with the roads over here, you can't really thrash it. First and second, yes. And I take my daughter swimming on a Saturday and we go on the slip road for the motorway and I get up to the speed limit in second, because it's the only place that I can actually really hammer it. First, second, and then
your fun's over.
That's it. You're straight and stop getting. Just going back a bit, where you the mileage thing, that really just fucks me off, pardon my French, but where people buy the cars and then you're right, they're there to be driven, they're made to be enjoyed. Engineers and designers spend years and years evolving this design to something that's going to give you this joy and this invoke something in you. And people go, I want to put it in my garage and I don't want to put any miles on it and I don't want to get it scratched, and because I'm going to save it for the next person. I went to the Porsche dealership in Reading, near where I live, and they had a 2019 911 Speedster. Gorgeous looking thing. Only manual car they have in the entire dealership. And so almost 3.5 years old, it had 622 miles on it. And you just think, what's the point? What is the point? Yeah, and my 996 has, like you say, about accessibility of power and accessibility of cars. My 996 has 157,000 miles on it. It's crusty as hell. I bought it for £6,500, and I've been driving it as my everyday car for nearly 4 years now. The amount of miles per miles, as you say, it's just ridiculous how much it's cost me, how much I've spent on it, and how much I enjoy it. And I leave it wherever I want. It doesn't matter if it's got bird poo on it or whatever.
Right. There's a lot of bang for the buck. And who cares about the headlights? You don't see them when you're driving, right?
Exactly. That's one of the main things that I always talk about. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you, actually, because I know you've done loads of stuff, I've seen a lot of your interviews and things like that. But there's a period between you going to that Earl's Court show and then going to LA in 86. In that time, obviously, you got into the music thing, you were into running, you were doing all sorts of different things. And then, you're also bumming around a bit, different jobs, but nothing really concrete. You had no real responsibility. But in your passion for cars, because from a UK point of view, it was a bit of a dead time. I mean, we made some seriously shit cars during that time. How did your passion for cars evolve during that time, or was it almost on pause until you went to LA?
It wasn't pause, but I grew up, my dad was a salesman. I grew up in a working class environment, so we never had a cool car. He had company cars, right? So in England, I was there until I was 19 in Sheffield. I never had a driver's license. So I was exposed to motorsports through watching, Grandstand and Formula One. And, that era was great. British motorsports is still sort of the epicenter of the world. So I watched a lot of motorsports on TV. I'd go to Donington, Mallory Park, Cadwell Park. My dad was sort of mechanically minded. My Uncle David, who was a graphic designer, had some success. So he had the cool car. My Uncle Mick had an E-Type Jag, but my Uncle David, who'd married my mom's sister, he had a Ferrari Dino, which he then traded into a 308 GTB. And so he sort of had the cool cars, but we never really went in them. He was one of that was sort of fastidious, and he was that guy that didn't really put miles on the cars, but we're aware of them. So London Earl's Court Motor Show, pivotal part to my life. I'm 10 years old. but I wasn't around cool cars per se. In Sheffield, you didn't see really cool cars very often. Like seeing a 924 was cool. You know, we weren't seeing 930 turbos on the road. You know, it was just a bunch of, you know, British cars of that era trying, you know, and they're all ropey and rusty, right? Stags and Jags and TR7s and midgets and Sprites and, you know, the great British cars. But what you'd see those, but you wouldn't see exotic European cars. So I think I was on pause a little bit in the sense of, by the time I became a teenager, I'd been doing a lot of cross-country running, athletics, a little bit of success. Then 13, I get into heavy metal, 14, 15, going to shows, 15, 16, going down the pub, you know, left school at 15 on the dole. You know, my focus then wasn't so much fulfill my dream of getting a Porsche. It was, I'm going to go see Motorhead and UFO and Saxon and Rainbow, and I'm going to gigs in Donington. You know, I went to Monsters of Rock Festival at Donington 1982 when I was 15. I went back 84. Van Halen played, I was 17. So that sort of teenage period, call it the 5 years in Sheffield before I left, so 81 to 86, all I cared about were going to heavy metal shows, you know, spent a lot of time sneaking into the pub at 15, 16 years old. So growing my hair long, sort of trying to avoid arguing with my dad, who would say, cut your hair and get a real job. I had no vision, no future. I wasn't going nowhere fast. You know, it wasn't like, here's my 5-year program of where I'm going to be, school, university, college, high-paying job. None of that was on my radar. You know, so left school at 15, almost 16, bummed around on the dole for a year. Sort of sex, drugs, rock and roll, you can call it, Sheffield style, full Monty fever. You know, my life was a bit like full Monty, minus the, you know, the male stripping going on. And then, you know, I came to the States when I was 19, did this thing called Camp America. And that represented the ultimate freedom. I've talked about this often, but in Sheffield, I was still living at home with my mum and dad, didn't have a car, didn't have a driver's license, didn't have a proper job, no adult responsibility. Coming to America, I didn't really have much more, but I had the ultimate freedom of no one really telling me, you know, you have to be home by a certain time. And if you're living under our roof, you have to abide by these rules. So you got to remember LA, 86, 87, everything I'd ever sort of grown up watching on TV shows, they were all shot in LA. You know, the music I was listening to at that time, Guns N' Roses, Motley Crue, glam rock, the epicenter was LA. So for me, that period of time of arriving in LA on a Trailways bus, honestly, less than a mile from where I'm now sat, was like dream come true. That was for a couple of years, that was my Woodstock in the sense of that was my era of ultimate freedom, no responsibility. Cars weren't a factor into it at that point. It was just, I'm 19, 20, 21, living the life in LA, escaped out of Sheffield, you know, story. And it was just ultimate freedom. The cars sort of came a little bit later, you know, early 90s when I was 25. I acquired my first Porsche in 1992. That was a 74 slant nose conversion. I paid $7,500 for it. But that was the third car I ever owned. The first car I ever bought, I guess I bought it in 1988, was a 1977 Toyota Corolla 2TC. I paid $200 for it, drove it around without a driver's license for about 9 months, took my California driver's test in it in Santa Monica in, I guess it was 88, because I still have my driver's license. I was 21 years old. That's 88. It's going back quite a long time now. You know, it's like 34 years ago. Second car I ever bought was probably in 1990, 91. I got a Saab 900 Turbo. That was like the architect's car, right? You know, it was like,
yeah.
You know, that was a little bit of success to buy a Saab 900 SPG Turbo, which was a fun car. But the ultimate sort of dream come true was buying that Porsche slant nose, the 74 conversion, which I bought at the Pomona swap meet in 1992 when I was 25, and I paid $7,500 for it. And that was dream come true. 15 years after I wrote the letter to Porsche, having gone through everything I just described, I acquired that car, and that was like, wow. You know, it wasn't a turbo, but it looked like a turbo, and it was like, that was all I needed. Wide body, you know, it was on chrome rims, and it's just a different era. It was kind of like the Miami Vice era. And, you know, I still love slant noses. You know, my era, I suppose, of real passion is late 60s, early 70s. You know, it's the golden era for me of motorsports. You look back at that, it's everything from Vic Elford, Monte Carlo Rally to Porsche's first win at Le Mans in 1970. And, you know, 60s, 70s for me was the pinnacle of my inspiration, maybe rolling into the 80s a little bit. So that's kind of the story, is how I'd gone from Sheffield to LA and a couple of cars along the way.
Interestingly, a couple of things you brought up there. You mentioned earlier about going to Sydney Motorsport Park for the Rennsport reunion when you were in Australia in 2016. I was thinking to myself, because I live so far from Sydney, over in Perth there, I spent a few of my formative years in Sydney. I actually went and saw Guns N' Roses at Sydney Motorsport Park. It was called Eastern Creek Raceway back then. It's like the biggest concert I'd ever been to, you know, Skid Row.
What year was that?
93.
Okay.
And it was like 250,000 people there. It was like the biggest concert ever, you know, and seeing the Gunners live, it was just an amazing experience. And it was like that classic rock show. They just put it on with interest. It was such a great experience for me, you know. And I was in my early 20s at the time. I'm a little bit younger than you, but not much. And it's, so having my eyes opened and being at Eastern Creek or Sydney Motorsport Park, walking on the track to get into the middle there where they actually had the concert. It was a really big eye opener for me, and getting on. You know, I haven't been back since, and I'd love to go back there to actually drive the track because I haven't had the opportunity to.
I feel like I should grab my Whitesnake vinyl again.
Yeah, I mean, that was me like going to Donington. You know, Monsters of Rock, Donington 82, 84. Let's not forget Donington's racetrack. Let's not forget Donington hosted the British F1 at one period. You know,
one in center.
Yeah. So you talk about Guns N' Roses. First time I saw Guns N' Roses was at the LA Coliseum, probably 4 miles from where I'm sat now, opening up for the Rolling Stones in like 1987, 88 on the Steel Wheels tour. You know, which I think back now it's like whatever it is, 30, 40, 35 years ago.
And they're still going, both of them.
Old back then, but, you know, they're still rocking, and, you know, the rest is history. But, yeah, I mean, these are memorable moments for sure.
Yeah.
Would that have been the Voodoo Lounge tour of the Stones?
No, it was Steel Wheels. I should look it up. I'm pretty sure it was the Steel Wheels tour. It was 87, 88.
Because I saw the Stones at Wembley on the Voodoo Lounge tour. They were supported by the Black Crows.
What year was that? That's later.
That would have been 90s, though.
Yeah, this is what Google's for. You know, I'm 90% sure it's still. Google that later on if you're able to do it right now. Get on Google. Rolling Stones, North American US tour, Steel Wheels 87, 88.
Because if it's Guns N' Roses, then that would have been on the back of, because they did the soundtrack for Terminator 2, didn't they?
That was later too. This was before it was like 6 months before Guns N' Roses became the biggest band in the world when Appetite for Destruction broke huge. This was like 6 months before that. Early days of MTV. You know, I don't know if Welcome to the Jungle was out or not, but it's that era. It's the pinnacle era of Guns N' Roses about to explode and become the biggest band in the world.
Yeah, because the song that really threw, because I remember is Paradise City.
Yeah.
And it just, you know, everybody was singing that song and everybody was talking about it. And you went, where do these guys come from? And then you look it up and you go, oh yeah, they've been around for a while. And bands did their time, didn't they, on the circuit? It doesn't feel like they do that now because they're 18 and massively successful. Whereas bands did their time around the circuit. The Beatles did, the Stones did, you know, all of them did.
Different era, you know, it was pre-internet, no YouTube, no one's got a cell phone communicating across the world. You know, when you think back, it's amazing how we actually did stuff without a cell phone, but we seem to manage, right? You know, I got to America at 19 years old and, you know, I'd write letters back home or, you know, occasionally make a phone call. But, you just take it for granted now how bands become huge without ever performing, right? They're just recording like Billie Eilish in the bedroom or something, and then before you know it, they got 1 billion downloads, and they're the biggest thing that I've never heard of.
So actually, speaking of which, fame-wise, so for you, because obviously you were in the, you know, in the place where fame goes with just being where you are and people doing what they're doing, and then you were doing your fashion, you were doing the the Porsche thing, you started doing that, and then the Urban Outlaw movie came out, the film. And for you, was that like an overnight thing that where suddenly you were from, people knew who you were, lots of people knew who you were already, but suddenly Urban Outlaw, this thing threw you out into the common consciousness of people? Was that an overnight thing? Did that feel like an overnight thing?
Yes and no. I mean, I bought my first Porsche in 92. Urban Outlaw came out 2012. So that's a 20-year period. Pre-Urban Outlaw, I was active on these Porsche forums, Pelican Parts, Early S Registry, for probably 5 years. I joined the Porsche Owners Club, took what I would call my aggressive street driving to the track, I guess in 02, 03, 04. So for that period, 02, 5 years on to 07, I was doing a lot of track days. Yeah, in 277, probably 40, 50 track days a year. Local tracks, Willow Springs, but I'd go California Speedway, Vegas, Phoenix, Thunderhill, Laguna Seca, a lot of track days. And that kind of morphed into 2007, 2008. All the time and energy and emotion I'd done doing track days and money that I'd spent kind of backed out of that a bit, started acquiring cars. That period, call it 2007, 2008, started building these sport purpose or inspired builds. I document these threads on the forums, Pelican Parts, Early S Registry. So 08, 09, 010, it's a small world, that Porsche forum world. And of course, everyone knows everything about everything and, telling you you've got the wrong shade of CAD plating and, that screw and stuff like that. But, so I was building my own I was just doing my own thing, building these cars, that are inspired short wheelbase. It was everything from a 67R to an ST and everything in between. I didn't really go beyond 73, but I was doing these elements. It wasn't so much, okay, there's a poster of a 73 RS, right? Everyone's cloned that. It's like not really that difficult to build an RS out of a long wheelbase, slap on some flares, put a ducktail on, bingo, you've got an RS look. So I was pretty active on the forums before Urban Outlaw came out, which is how Tamir Moscovici found me. Probably around 2010, 2011, I started getting some coverage in magazines such as Total 911, actually. Total 911, weirdly, came up with Urban Outlaw. They did an article on me in 2011, urban environment, building outlaw cars. So I didn't even come up with the term Urban Outlaw. It was like the story of the article in Total 911, circa 2011. And I got an email from this crazy Canadian guy, Timmy Moscovici. He was a film director, did a couple of motorsports things, but was pretty much bored of doing Bud Light commercials and wanted to make a short YouTube documentary for his reel, which he thought would get him into more car-related motorsports content. So I'd never met him. I'd been in the film location business, renting out my building for production companies, reality shows for 10 years before that. So I'd been around production, big stuff, American Idol and America's Next Top Model, but I was never the focus of the feature. So, and I turned down quite a few people, believe it or not, saying, why don't we make a film about it? It just didn't seem right. I didn't click with the people. The chemistry wasn't appealing to me, believe it or not, at the time. And then for some reason, Tamir just sort of connected. And I thought, okay, how bad can this be? He ended up flying down on frequent flyer miles. What became Urban Outlaw was a pet project for him. It was shot on a small but very talented crew. The stars aligned. We shot it over 4 days, February 2012. And we didn't know what was going to happen. The original concept was a short YouTube documentary. And then June, we're almost in June, it's almost 10 years ago, and it's going to build up to a long, rambling 10-year anniversary of Urban Outlaw. But the catalyst was in June of 2012, we released like a 3-minute trailer for the documentary. And it was weird because I wasn't really on social media. One of my buddies said, you should probably get on social media. And I didn't even have an iPhone. I might have had a Motorola Razr flip phone because I was always like, who the fuck are these guys doing this on the phone all the time? It just seemed obnoxious. Right? So I remember one of my buddies sent me Facebook, wasn't even Instagram, Facebook. I'd never posted. He set up an account, did one photo, And then the documentary trailer came out in June of 2012. And like the first day it came out, we didn't know were 500 people going to view it. We had no concept of what views meant, really. But what I remember vividly was not really being on Facebook and not really knowing how to get on it. But my buddy was showing me. And remember, I hadn't posted, he'd put one photo of the garage. Then the trailer came out. And like within an hour, I had like 1,500 followers and all these requests. And then like within a few hours, we realized the trailer had got picked up by Top Gear. And like it had gone from 5,000 to 10,000 to 50,000 in a day of views. And then I started getting all these friend requests on Facebook from like Spain. I go, what's going on in Spain? Well, of course, someone had reposted the actual trailer. And it was this emotional roller coaster ride for the next kind of couple of weeks of the story just kept getting like Top Gear putting it out straight away was like, boom, you went from 0 to 100 pretty quickly. You're on the radar. I think what was great about Tamir Moscovici's team was, obviously I ramble on, you can sense that, right? He'd ask me a question, what does Porsche mean to you? I ramble on for 20 minutes. They were able to dissect the little, I guess, gem of wisdom and edit it together. I've realized 10 years later, it's all about the edit to telling the story. An Urban Outlaw ended up becoming a 32-minute short documentary film, but there were a few pivotal things of the first week of Top Gear and Facebook, and within a week I'm up 5,000 followers, and I had to switch from a friend account to something else. Then I got on Instagram. It was like this whirlwind tornado. Then the other big thing was we got a phone call from Nike. And Nike's head of action sports, Sandy Bodek, had seen the Top Gear thing and reached out to me and was a Porsche guy, owned a GT2. And long story short, asked if we could screen a rough cut of the film to Nike, who was hosting some design summit seminar with like 25 of their creatives. They ended up renting my building in downtown for 2 days, holding this design summit planning event. I did an inspirational talk to him. It was like, wow, what is going on here? Like, how are we on Nike's radar where we ended up screening a very rough mix of the film, which wasn't even finished? They ended up flying Tamir down from Toronto, rented Soho House. So it was kind of gone from shot it in February, nothing really happened till June, Top Gear story, Nike, 2-week period, boom, explosion. Then this anticipation for, well, when's the film coming out? I'd be posting on Pelican and Earliest Registry a little bit about it. And then Tamir got it into the Rain Dance Film Festival, which is a rainy version of Sundance. We're going to England to screen the movie at Leicester Square, Piccadilly Circus, at the Gorm, whatever the theater was there, on a Saturday night. It was like, wow, how did this happen? The film had gone from a little short documentary at this point to a 32-minute documentary that got into a film festival. And we flew to London in September. I had a little outlaw gathering and a few people came from Europe. And it was just this awesome night. And then the film came out October 15th, 2012, almost 10 years ago. And then that's when things changed. I started getting invited to events, and even Porsche wrote me a letter saying, hey, we've seen the film. We heard about you as a 10-year-old boy, and they invited me to come and visit them. I ended up going to tour the factory in the museum, and I went there they give you a little sticker when you go. I don't know if you've been, but there's a date on it. And this was purely random, but I got there on 9/11, 2013. 9/11, it was September 11th. It wasn't, like some people plan to pick up their car on a certain day, like 9/11 or 9/30 or whatever it is. Mine was purely random. But that sort of opened the floodgates to everything. And I think Porsche realized, even though I didn't fit the Porsche demographic and I wasn't your typical Porsche person, I had something that they couldn't manufacture and put in a cup. It was passion, right? True enthusiast. Being in love with the brand since I was 10, bought my first one at 25. Now I'm 45, made a film about it. But the Urban Outlaw documentary is not really a film about Porsche. Porsche is the vehicle that takes you on my journey of everything I've rambled on about from the 10-year-old leaving school, whatever, right? Tamir was able to encapsulate that in a 32-minute documentary, which went on to win some awards. And you got to remember the timing of that film. There wasn't really a lot of content out there getting made in a cinematic way back then, the way that he did it. And so that was kind of, the bar was pretty high. I didn't realize at the time, how great a piece of film that was. But within 2 weeks of it coming out, Jay Leno's calling me. I'm on the Jay Leno garage. I'd stuck into this show called SEMA, which is the biggest aftermarket show in America, and perhaps top 5 car show in the world. And I'd heard about it because I wasn't in the industry. I'd never gone. I literally borrowed someone's badge. I think my name was Bob Smith for the day. I flew to Vegas for the day. I get a phone call whilst I'm at SEMA on my little Motorola flip phone. Hey, it's Robert Angelo. I'm calling from Jay Leno's show. Jay saw Urban Outlaw. Love to have you on his show. I go, how did this happen? But literally, that was like, I think a Tuesday. And on the Saturday, I'm on the Jay Leno Garage show. And then that opened the door. And then 2 years later, I ended up doing a TED Talk, 2014, which probably 98% of the people that had watched the TED Talk had no idea who I was, weren't into cars, but connected with the go with your gut feeling message of just trying to do what you love and don't know. Kind of my story, right? But the TED Talk was another catalyst like Urban Outlaw. And the TED Talk's probably been viewed more than anything else I've ever done. It's almost 10 million views. And people still come up to me almost 8 years later in weird places that, hey, I just saw your TED Talk. So, Urban Outlaw came, that led to the TED Talk. That led to sort of me getting invited around the world to go to events and drive cars. And then 2017, I had a book come out, autobiography of my life. I did a book tour. But those were sort of the stepping stones from Urban Outlaw to TED Talk to the book. And then what I'm doing, this is the 10-year anniversary of Urban Outlaw. So I sort of thought, well, maybe we should do something. Everyone's always going, are you doing a follow-up? Well, we're not doing a follow-up, but I'm going to end up doing a collection of my cars in the Peterson Museum. 10 of my sort of outlaw builds on display at the Peterson Automotive Museum here in LA, starting October 15th and going through into 2023, which will then open up what appears to be a year-long Porsche exhibit at the Peterson Museum. Because next year is the 75th anniversary of Porsche. So next year is going to be a blockbuster year for all things Porsche. Rennsport reunions happening. There'll be 75th anniversary, limited edition, whatevers. And so I'm going to roll into that. But for me, I'm excited to actually have 10 of my cars in celebration of 10 years of Urban Outlaw at the Peterson Automotive Museum for a couple of months. Will sort of be, it'll be a milestone for the film. It'll be some credibility actually having my cars on display at a world-renowned museum. So I'm pretty excited about that. So there's a long rambling sort of take on Urban Outlaw, the impact it had, how it came about, and sort of what it meant.
One of those things that, it's firstly, folks, anyone listening to this, this is the start of the 10-year celebration.
Right here. You heard it here first.
Right here. And the other thing is that throughout everything that you've done publicly, from Urban Outlaw, and even before, you've kind of gone with this philosophy of don't overthink it, go with the feeling, go with the flow. And it served you so well, to go with a feeling. Because, even things like when I buy a car, I buy the owner. When I go and do something, if it feels right, just do it. If you overthink it, you talk yourself out of doing even the most sort of no-brainer thing that you're about to do. You can overthink it to the point that you just, you become inactive. And whereas you've gone, I'm not going to overthink it. I'm just going to go, this feels right. I'm going to go with it. And do you feel that is the feeling that you're going to carry through, or is there now baggage where you think about more?
No. I mean, I think it works for a certain type of human entrepreneurial spirit. A lot of people that I've met that have become successful really kept it simple. They just did what they love and they didn't overthink it. I think a lot of people are afraid of failure. I tell this story a lot where you got an idea, you talk to your buddy because you're not quite sure, you don't have full inner confidence, and your buddy, family member, or whoever it may be may go, I don't know if that's such a good idea. It'll never work. So people don't cross the start line a lot of times. Everyone might have an idea, but the fear of failure is what prevents people from actually starting something, whatever it may be, business, buying something, whatever it may be, right? Even if it's just, I don't know what I want to eat on the menu. And then they ask a waiter, well, what's your favorite dish on the menu? And then they get the waiter's favorite dish that they don't like. It's just don't overthink it. I never asked other people's opinions on what should I do. Like when we bought this building, which was the best thing we ever did, didn't realize it at the time. People were like, why are you buying a building? That's kind of a stupid idea. Why do you want that liability? Well, we were just sick of paying other people's mortgages, and it kind of made sense. We then got into the film location business, which was pretty lucrative, which enabled me to have more cars than I ever thought I would own. And then the neighborhood became one of the trendiest neighborhoods in LA. I got Spotify 200 yards away, and WeWork and Warner Brothers and Soho House, but it wasn't like that. I've lived in this neighborhood since 1994, 28 years. It's a little bit like Shoreditch wasn't always cool, right? Yeah. Might have been an edgy place. Now Shoreditch might be the epicenter, or it might not be, who knows? But so the moral to the story is I never asked other people's opinions on what should I do. It just either felt right or it didn't. And that was my whole life coming to America, trying never to go back to Sheffield, which didn't happen. I stayed, right? Starting this clothing company, designing things that I personally liked. The common thread that connects my life, really, whether it's the clothing business that I built, the property that I bought and developed where I really made money. The car thing is just a hobby. I don't really sell them very often, so it's not a business. But the common thread that connects all three of those things that I've had some personal success and gratification in is just doing things that I love to do that are creative, that inspire me to get out of bed. 8 a.m. in the morning is not early for me. 5 a.m. is early, 8 a.m. You want to get shit done, you get up early. But if you're so passionate and motivated by it, you're already automatically, I don't have an alarm. I'm already waking up, eager to go. I'm still that way. We're currently restoring an old house that we bought in the Hollywood Hills that people thought we were nutty for buying. That's a sort of diamond in the rough. But you got to find things that occupy your time, that are creative and inspiring, because that's how you keep moving forward, whatever it may be. Cars are just a big part of my life, but they're not the be-all and end-all of who I am. People identify me as, oh, you're that Porsche guy, right? Well, I own a lot of Porsches, but I don't say I'm that Porsche guy. I'm a dude with a beard that owns cars, and a lot of them are Porsches, but I have other interests beyond that. So, to me, it's just do what you love and don't overthink it.
Yeah, because from how you're known, if someone doesn't have that passion for Porsche or for all things automotive, then they would just see you. Oh yeah, you're that guy with cars. Whereas there's many layers, and I'm going to ask you about your E-Type in a minute and your Ferrari, because that's a bit of a departure for you, and Rolls-Royce. But I've got to ask you about chips first. Sorry, Mark.
Oh, fish and chip.
Yeah, but not just that. You posted something on Instagram, and obviously, I follow you on Instagram.
I appreciate
you're a fellow Brit, and you posted something. I think it was a picture of chips, and they had the skin on.
Yeah.
And I thought, no, Magnus, no. In Sheffield, that would never happen. In the UK, that would never happen. That's not chip shop chips.
Yeah, I'm not as picky about skin on, skin off as I am over battered fish. Like the chips are the accessory to the fish. We can deep dive into chips and chip buddies and chips and curry sauce and chips and mushy peas, but it's the chips.
We should have started talking about this earlier, Magnus. We should have started. You've opened the door now. When you say curry sauce, you say chip butty. Oh my God, that's it.
Yeah, it all starts with obviously Brits abroad. I'm not a foodie. My pet peeve are 3-hour dinners at fancy restaurants where you leave for me, it's painful. You've wasted a lot of time. You're still hungry, and you might have spent more money than you really want to spend. Just give me a good plate of fish and chips, but that is not that easy to find. You can tell when it rolls out, and the fish looks like a square brick, and it's got this greasy armor on it that you just know it's like over battered, over greasy, and inside it's going to be overcooked and rubbery. So, my big thing is fish and chips should be like the everyman's dinner, right? You go to some restaurants and it's like, how is fish and chips $28?
Yes.
You throw the chip in, it would be like, £2, a couple of quid or whatever. I don't know what it is at the chippy today, but finding fish and chips anywhere in America is not really easy. Every Irish pub, of which there's plenty, all have fish and chips on the menu. But 9 times out of 10, cooked. You'll have a waitress tell you, I go, this is overcooked and greasy. And the waitress will go, cod's greasy. Cod is not a greasy fish. You just fucking put way too much batter on it and overcooked it, right? So it's rubbery. It should be light and crispy and flaky. But fish and chips, it's like the everyman's meal that came in newspaper, right? It's not fine dining. So, you go to a restaurant, you want to be adventurous, you get fish and chips, and it's like $28 and it's not good. It's like, a couple of little pieces of fish and 5 fries. You go, how is this fucking fish and chips, right?
I hate that.
One of the greatest cities I've ever been to is in Stonehaven, Scotland, just north of Aberdeen, where my sister happens to live. And they do it right. It's still not in old newspaper because I guess, you can't environmentally serve it in newspaper and have the ink come off on the chips anymore, right? But to me, it can come in a box, and I'm the guy that's getting the side of curry sauce and the mushy peas. And, even in the fancy restaurant occasionally, or the British pub, I'm asking for a bread roll. They don't know what a bread roll is. I go, give me a hamburger roll. What do you want that for? Don't worry about it. Just give it me. I'm putting the butter on. I'm putting the chips on it, the peas on it, a little bit of fish. I'm making the chip buddy sandwich. That's me. I'm still making that. So, fish and chips are just one of those things that you used to take for granted if you could get it everywhere. You can't get it everywhere in America. And when you find it 9 times out of 10, it's really not well done. And I've talked to chefs. I go, why is it so hard for people to do fish and chips? It shouldn't really be that hard. So, but back to chips with skin on it, that's not the norm, but I'm not anti-skin on chips. It's more about over-battered fish.
It's witchcraft, Magnus. It's witchcraft.
All right, witchcraft it is. But chips and curry sauce and mushy peas.
I'm so glad you're passionate about this topic because I've been talking about it for ages.
Podcast after podcast, mate.
You've got to be. I mean, what does fish and chips cost at the chippy? What's the average fish and chips in the chippy in England?
Well, my local chippy, they are massive. So I'm a family of 4. I go and get 2 fish and chips, and there's tons left over. The fish is huge, and it's not even the haddock. It's cold.
How much?
But it's like £9
for 4 people.
No,
£5.
No, each person fish and chips.
Yeah, so it's gone up a bit. I mean, I remember being in London. Shoreditch, of course, got to be trendy, right? Go to Shoreditch, Brick Lane, Curry, another favourite of mine. But there's a fancy, not fancy. It's a fish and chip shop that's become very trendy there. It's on the corner. It's super touristy. It's kind of set up like a 50s British fish and chippy, right? But I seem to recall there were like £14 there for fish and chips. Maybe that's, trendy Shoreditch, London. It's expensive for essentially takeout fish and chips.
It is. I'm going to show my age now, but I remember when it was £1 in the 80s for fish and chips. And then that was before there was tax on potatoes.
Yeah. Tax on potatoes. Not aware of that.
Yeah, and then suddenly they went up to like £2, and then it goes on and on and on. But I appreciate that not everyone listening will be passionate about fish and chips as Magnus and I are. So
I'm passionate about that. I'm passionate about a good curry, and then the basics: beans on cheese on toast. That's about it. I actually, early days of COVID, I had my little outlaw cooking show. It was kind of weirdly, COVID was great for me because I didn't travel. No one stopped by. I ended up doing a bunch of creative things that I'd always said, I don't have time to do. I ended up doing 3 seasons of this show for Haggerty, got behind the sewing machine and trying to occupy your time, right? And I ended up doing outlaw cooking. It was a Sunday cooking show where I'd do like British staples, literally beans on toast. I did a veggie curry. I did a few other things. One of them stupidly was just how to make the perfect cup of tea, right? There's more to it than sticking the tea bag in the cup, putting the boiling water on. It was like, heating the pot, does the milk go in first or does the milk go in after? There's a whole debate on when you put the milk in the cup. So it was just a way of occupying time. But I'm passionate about well-cooked basic food. Like I say, my pet peeve are these 3-hour lunches at fancy restaurants, at car shows with car guys. It's just like painful for me.
Yeah.
The rule, Magnus, cup of tea, the milk never touches the tea bag.
Tea bag. All right. Mine was brewed in the pot, going through the strainer with leaves. I was doing old school.
There you go. Yeah.
That's the full-on experience.
This is different.
Well, all right. So a tea bag question. I mean, PG Tips, Thai Food, Yorkshire Gold. What's your pick?
Yorkshire Gold.
Oh, there you go.
Every time.
Yorkshire Gold seems to have come on as a nation's favorite, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, I've been using the Clipper one recently because did you hear the whole thing about plastics and tea bags?
No.
And then Clipper came out and went, oh, it's an organic one. And suddenly you go, actually, me having a cup of tea, I'm destroying the planet. How can this be? So you're doing it with a strainer. You're the one who's being more eco than I am. Which matters.
Yeah, I mean, growing up as a kid, I don't even remember Yorkshire tea, even though, obviously I'm from Yorkshire. It was Thai Food, PG Tips, Tetleys. Yorkshire tea is like kale. Where did that come from? It's kind of came out of nowhere. It's like, kale's like, what is kale? All of a sudden, it's like a super trendy food. I mean, where the fuck did kale come from?
I love that you're calling kale and Yorkshire tea the two things that came out of nowhere. I love that you're saying that because for me, you're exactly right. When I was growing up, it was you were one of three: Tetley, PG, or Thai Food. They were the big ones. There's nothing else.
Sprouts, like my mum used to cook these, Sunday roast occasionally, but I hated Brussels sprouts because she'd always sort of overboil them and they'd be soggy with no flavor. Now it's like you got these like grilled Brussels sprouts with some balsamic vinegar and the crunchy. I go, wow, I never had Brussels sprouts like this as a kid.
Yeah,
right? They were always soggy at home.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. You know what? That next urban cooking show has just written itself.
Soggy Brussels sprouts are a thing of the past. You're going to have char grilled, balsamic vinegar with some little pine nuts on the side and a drizzle of whatever your latest flavor is.
And you've got to eat them over.
It's definitely a show. I joke about how I should do the bearded man's guide to basic fine dining, right? Everyone's, not everyone, but there's a lot of cooking shows, right? People do like cooking shows, but the majority of them don't, or at least the ones I'm familiar with, don't necessarily seem to focus on really basic food. And, being sort of the anti-gourmet dining thing, it's almost like I need like an Anthony Bourdain's No Reservation bearded man's guide to find basic dining, where we go on a journey discovering people, places, and food, and I drive one of these P cars. It's a show that I want to do, actually.
Oh my God, that's it. That's going to happen.
And there you go. And you guys can help out with it.
Everybody's probably thinking this is supposed to be about cars. So I'm going to ask you about the E-Type, because the E-Type is a big thing in my history, because when I was a kid in the mid to late 80s, my dad worked at Jaguar cars in Birmingham.
Oh, wow.
And I remember as I used to play football at the local with my school, and I used to walk on a Saturday past the factory, and if he was working, I'd walk in and get a lift off him. And I remember walking in there, and they'd just done the launch of the XJ220. So in a big display box was the XJ220 with an E-Type next to it, and it was the first time I'd ever seen one. It was the Roadster, and it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. And thought one day I'm going to own that. And obviously, the more money you earn, the more expensive it's getting exponentially. And You've got one. Yours is a Series 3?
I actually have two, believe it or not. Ooh. But they're not the first E-Type that I own. What I currently own are the Ugly Duckling 2+2 automatics. These are the cars that no one wants, but they're the affordable E-Types. And there's a goal behind what I have. But my E-Type story began, I owned a Series 1 in the 90s. I had a 67 Series 1. That's the last year of the glass-covered headlights, 4.2 Synchro Moss box. They break down into three series, 1, 2, and 3, as you know. Yep. Series 1 came out in 61, Geneva, 150-mile-an-hour supercar, flat floor, outside bonnet latch, 3.8 motor, non-synchro 4-speed box. That's the purest. And second gen purist is what I had, glass-covered headlights, Gen 2 of Series 1. What I currently own is, I owned that car in the 90s when they were affordable. I kept it all the way through 2011, which was the 50th anniversary of the E-Type. Yes. And I sold it in 2011, but I'd bought it in the 90s. You know, it was a great story of, you know, back then it's pre-internet. So I have all these car stories about, I'd get the Auto Trader, the sports car trader. It would come out on a Thursday, but you could get it Wednesday night at midnight. Coming back from a club, I'd always pick it up. One of the craziest stories I ever bought, I'm going to switch gears slightly and talk about a Lotus Europa, then I'm going to circle back around to the E-Type. I bought a Lotus Europa 73 twin cam. It'd been for sale, Walnut Creek, California. It was advertised for like $7,800. Been a couple of weeks on the sports car trader. I call the guy up. This is when, you know, shit didn't sell in like 10 minutes. He goes, well, you know, I'll drive it down to California, Southern California. He was Northern California, San Francisco. He goes, I want to visit my brother next weekend. I'll drive it down from Walnut Creek to Orange County. I said, well, if it makes it, I'll buy it. That was how I bought my Lotus Europa, because who would expect a 73 twin cam Lotus Europa to actually drive 400 miles without breaking down? And the E-Type story was kind of similar. E-Type Series 1 restored car in Sacramento. You know, I ended up flying. I bought a round trip ticket Southwest, flew up to Sacramento, 20 grand in a backpack. Guy meets me at the airport, picks me up in the E-Type, end up buying the car in Sacramento, drive it back the same day. Everything's going great. And remember, the car's restored. I get within a quarter of a mile of my loft downtown, less than a mile from where I'm sitting right now. Clutch went out. And it was like, welcome to the world of E-Type Jag ownership. Fix the clutch. Next thing, car starts overheating. Then we go, you know, bigger radiator, dual fan, solve the overheating problem. But the Series 1 E-Type, you know, I'd park it in the warehouse. We wouldn't drive it for 6 months. We go, why don't we drive that car? It's so beautiful to look at. You know, then we'd drive it, something else would break. But what I've learned with them, and this is going to tie into the Rolls-Royce as well, British cars have to be driven. You let them sit, they're not going to start, hoses are going to crack, they're going to overheat, thermostats are going to stick, they're not going to open. So that is the story with almost all cars are better to be driven. To answer your question on the E-Type, I told you the story about the Series 1. Recently, I'm like, I kind of want another E-Type, but I started looking up prices for, you know, coupes, manual. I don't want a roadster. And they just became really expensive. They were no longer 20 grand cars. It was kind of like buying Porsches for 5 grand that are now worth 10 times that. E-Types were kind of, you know, they hadn't gone up nearly as high as early 911s did, but they're still now like, you know, 100 grand to get a good coupe. And I didn't want to spend that much money. So I ended up buying this white Series 2 from a buddy who, it was his dad's car, and it was an automatic. And my goal always was to convert it to a manual 5-speed, like a modern gate rag that would come out of a BMW. But the white one was almost too nice. Then I ended up finding the Series 3, the blue one down in Florida, which has got this, like an old beat up leather couch that's all cracked up, been repainted. The original color was turquoise. It got painted darker blue, and it was an older paint job, like a lacquer paint, which had been out in the sun and baked and all cracked up to where it literally looks like a 100-year-old leather couch on the exterior. Blue interior, also 2+2 automatic. But the goal with that car is that's the keeper. Convert it to a manual 5-speed, redo all the underpinnings and suspension, but leave this perfectly messed up patina. But you got to remember, these are the 2+2, so they're 9 inches longer. They're pretty long. And that body style is awkward with the roof line. It's not as sleek. But in the Series 3, the V12, it's slightly flared and the wheel arches are cut slightly higher. And that Series 3 slightly flared body style actually suits the 2+2 awkward roofline a whole lot better. But the whole point was it was just variety, wanting to experience things that weren't 911s or weren't Porsches. Because even when it comes to Porsche, for me, it's not purely 911. It's, you know, front engine, mid engine, rear engine, air and water cooled. I got the 924s and 928s and 914s. So now it's all about variety, which, you know, leads into the other British car story, the Rolls-Royce. A couple of years ago, I bought Hannah, my girlfriend, I bought her a 88 560 SL Mercedes for her birthday.
Oh, wow.
Sort of an affordable classic that turned out not to be quite as great as we hoped it was. And long story short, we ended up trading an 88 SL through this independent Mercedes sort of sports car dealer. they had a Rolls-Royce in the corner, a 75 Shadow. And I'd always wanted a Rolls-Royce. I think a lot of English people want Rolls-Royces. And, they fall into a lot of categories, whether you like the Sweeney mobster from the 60s and 70s, or secondhand scrap dealer, secondhand car dealer, all the way up to the hobnob Savile Row thing. Like, there's nothing really much more British other than fish and chips and a Rolls-Royce, right? But of course, the Rolls-Royce is like, you start looking around and they fall into a lot of categories. They're like either really cheap pieces of shit with Chevy 350 motors in them. And of course, everyone tells you there's nothing more expensive than a cheap Rolls-Royce. But we ended up trading this 560 SL plus $2,000, 75 Rolls-Royce Shadow. And we're in the car now in the teens, We're not spending much money on it. And ironically, the car broke down on the test drive. It ran out of gas, didn't really break down, but even that didn't stop us doing the deal. So we get this 75 Shadow, long wheelbase. It's olive green, brown interior. It's got all the character in the world. We spend a little bit of money on it, but not much, couple of grand. And the key to them is you just got to keep driving them. And what I love about the vintage Rolls-Royce is, first of all, you're going down the road. This is 60 to 70 in a Rolls going straight. This is how it is. Delicate steering wheel. And the car forces you to slow down. It forces me to slow down. You can squeal tires at 20 miles an hour going around corners. So it's a bit like the 912 in the sense of it seems faster than it is. But Willow the dog loves it. You can get 4 people in it. Every journey in the vintage Rolls-Royce is a sort of trip down memory lane. It's a memorable moment. You can park it anywhere. No one looks at you like you're a douchebag in a vintage Rolls-Royce like they would in a new Rolls. Everyone wants to strike up a conversation. If I end up going to one of those 3-hour fancy lunches with Hannah and you go somewhere fancy, they'll park the car out front for you because, I generally hate people valet parking cars. But the Rolls, it's okay. They'll leave it out front. So you always sort of feel special in this car that's worth nothing, but it makes you feel like $1 million. And it's back to covering all the senses. I've driven new Rolls-Royces, and I don't really care for them. But vintage ones, now we own 2, his and hers. I just got mine. I ended up getting this 2-door coupe, which is really rare. It's not a Corniche. Corniche came out in 71. The 2-door Shadow coupe, Mulliner Park Ward, bespoke custom coach built. Rolls sent the bodies out because they were doing 4-door Shadows. 2-door coupe came out in 66, ran through 71. They only made 500 for the entire world. And then 71, they called them a Corniche. Everyone thinks it's a Corniche, but it's pre-Corniche. So I ended up finding this car in LA, 2-door coupe. It's all black. It was originally, we found out, burgundy. And it's just like a slightly cooler version of the 4-door Shadow because it's a 2-door coupe that you don't see. Then you go, oh, McQueen drove one in the Thomas Crown Affair. This is actually pretty cool. It's not the typical, you think of Rolls-Royce Corniche, at least in California, they're all convertibles. The majority of them are white. They're very Beverly Hills. This is not that car. This is like the late 60s, Thomas Crown Affair, Steve McQueen. It's rock and roll cool. It's, the type of car Keith Richards would drive. It's like the cool version of the 4-door Shadow. But yet again, it's not an expensive car. I paid for this 2-door coupe. So my point is, I'm at the point in life now where it's all about variety, still making memorable moments. It's not necessarily about how quick can you go from A to B, because none of these Rolls Royces are quick cars. You don't really want to go more than 80 in them because you don't stop great. They're super floaty. They roll around. But that's part of the occasion. I find that we're actually driving the Rolls more than we're driving anything else. The E-types, unfortunately, they're just not reliable enough. I haven't gone through them or found the right guy to go through them who's going to make them reliable, but I do want to get them to that point. Ironically, the guy that's working on the Rolls is this old-timer guy, Charlie Agapoo, who used to work for Carroll Shelby. I just did this series with How Did He Call the Big Thing, and Charlie Agapoo was Shelby's crew chief in the glory days of the GT40. English guy, moves out to LA, worked for Ken Miles, ends up being Shelby's crew chief throughout the whole Le Mans program of the GT40. Fast forward over the past 40, 50 years, he's the go-to Rolls-Royce guy in LA. So he's the guy that are taking care of these Rolls that we've got that spend a little bit of money, couple of grand, drive them all the time. They become reliable cars. But you park and let them sit, they're not reliable cars. So
has that second one broken down yet?
What's that?
Has that second one broken down yet?
Well, yeah, of course. The story with that car, we bought it, or I bought it 3 weeks ago. The car was donated to a charity in Orange County. The charity in Orange County, like in the States, a lot of people tax write-off, donate cars and not driving. So the two-door coupe had sat basically for the past 2 years. Went down, took a test drive. Of course, you drive around the block, it's fine. I'm picking it up in Irvine. It's 45 miles to downtown LA. I didn't really think I should tow it to Charlie's. I go, well, it's going to make it. It made it 30 miles, and all of a sudden I'm on the 5 freeway north. I feel a loss of power, and then a split second later, I see all the coolant over the windshield, steam coming out. I just managed to get off the 5 freeway north in this part of town called Montebello Commerce, which is heavy industry. I'm trying to sneak down the inside lane of the off-ramp because I know it's going to die. There's steam coming out. The whole 30 miles before you, it's like any first drive in any car. You're sort of watching the gauges the whole time, and you're very cautious. But 5 miles in, you start going a little bit faster. I'm cautious. I know the brakes are not great, so I've got a big gap in between, but I'm on this pretty heavy traffic freeway, and then it overheats, and I know it's going to die. And I'm trying to get off the off-ramp, and I'm surrounded by big rigs, like 53-foot tractor trailers, the industrial area. I'm trying to sneak, but a big rig's turning right. I know he's going to fucking knife jack me, so I back off. And then the car literally dies in the middle of the road, just sort of off the off-ramp, but not quite off, but it's dead. And I can't push it. Hannah's following behind in the turbo because she'd driven me down. I'm sort of blocking a 3-lane road. Before you know it, someone actually pushes me off to the side. We open up the hood, it had blown. A few things had gone wrong. The overflow on the tank had cracked. The thermostat was stuck, even though the temp gauge never showed running hot and it didn't smell running hot. It just blew a hose from the radiator to the water pump. That was it, game over. But here's the funny part of the story. Well, okay, no big deal. I've broken down in every single car. I've got AAA cell phone, blah, blah, blah. I'm less than 10 miles from downtown LA. Within 5 minutes of it being parked on this busy 3-lane road right by the freeway, it's noisy. I see a highway patrol guy. I go, this guy's going to stop because, we look like this in an odd area with a Rolls-Royce. Guy comes over, fanboys me. You're Magnus Walker, Highway Patrol, wants to get a photo with me in front of the Rolls-Royce. It's just broken down. I swear to God that happened. 2 minutes later, someone else comes up, wants a photo. So I said to Hannah, we got to leave the car here, but we got to go on the other side of the road. The block is too hot. We called AAA. We ended up waiting 2 fucking hours for AAA to come to pick this car up, to tow it straight to Charlie's, who basically rebuilt the brake system. It's got a very complicated brake system that's hydraulic. That's basically the same system that's on the Citroen, overcomplicated.
Is that the mineral oil or something, isn't it?
Yeah, it drives off a cam off the engine. There's 2 parts to it. It's just overcomplicated. There's a lot of overcomplicated things on that car. The overheating problem was pretty simple: new thermostat, new hose. But yeah, the car broke down on the drive home. And then I picked it up Friday. Hannah was just returning she'd been out in Monaco on a press trip with Mercedes. I picked it up at Charlie's in Hollywood. 4:30 Friday afternoon, I'm driving to LAX and then driving from LAX to downtown. 4:30 to 6 o'clock, the busiest rush hour. I say to Charlie, is this going to be okay? He goes, I think it is. I go, because this will be the trial by fire. I'm just going to sit in traffic for 2 hours, going to the airport and going back downtown. So if it's going to overheat or break down, this is where it's going to happen on a Friday afternoon, rush hour between 5 and 6 o'clock. Didn't miss a beat. And that was literally a couple of days ago. And then we just drove it all weekend, put up almost 200 miles on it with no issues. So now I'm making the list of things that I want to do. I can't quite it's got electric seats, but they're not moving. It's a little too high. The steering wheel's off center. So I'm making a list of things that the Rolls needs. But we're in love with that car. So there's me rambling about British cars.
How did you end up at a Dino?
Well, back in the day, I owned a 308 GTB, back to my Uncle David owning one. That was also one of the cars. I had a 79, last year the carbureted. And I always wanted a 512 boxer. And that to me was like a 308 GTB on steroids. And one of my top 5 cars, and I've driven a couple of them, Ferrari F40. But I don't have Ferrari F40 money. And I'm all about entry level everything. So to me, a couple of Ferraris I'd want, a 355, a 360, possibly one of those two. But I'd always liked the quirky 308 GT4 Dino, the wedgy Bertone. You know, it's the only non-Pininfarina Ferrari. This used to be a car you could buy for next to nothing. It's a car that no one wanted. You know, it falls into that category of 70s wedgy things like, you know, I had a short-lived love affair with a Lotus Esprit that turned out to be a lemon, which I'd bought on Bring a Trailer. And I just started, you know, I did this show for Hagley, The Next Big Thing, and one of the feature cars, The Next Big Thing was all about the underdog up-and-coming cars. Like we did a Lamborghini episode with an Espada, because when you think of Lamborghini, you don't think of a Spada, right? You know, you got to go down 20 Lamborghinis before you get to a Spada. Yeah. So I did an episode where I was comparing sort of an Espada with a 308 GT4 Dino. Even though the two are completely different, they fit the same category of entry-level, underdog, unloved, not traditional thoughts of a Ferrari. And I just really kind of wanted one. And I ended up finding this one local within 10 miles of where I'm at. It's an early one, Series 175, not red, non-sunroof. And it's not fast, it's lazy. It's compared to a 911, not nimble. It's tractor-like. It's not as fast as it seems. It doesn't turn in great. It doesn't really stop great. It doesn't really do anything great, but it sounds great. It's got the clickety-click, snickety-snick. Visibility's good. You don't see them. You know, it's the thinking man's Ferrari, right? The 308 GT4 Dino. But it's also the affordable Ferrari. You know, so I've been driving it. And, you know, the goal now is to actually make it perform better. I want to get it off the 14-inch wheels. I want to get it on some 15-inch Campagnolas. It's under-wheeled and under-tired. It's running a stock 14-inch rim that's 6.5 wide, 14 tall, with a tall profile tire. But it's got all the room in the world where I'm pretty sure I can get a 7 and 8 on it, with a modern sort of grippy tire like a Pirelli Trofeo R that still looks somewhat period correct. But the challenge is Campagnola doesn't make a Ferrari bolt pattern wheel. So it's got to be a custom spec wheel, which they'll do, or Group 4, who's sort of doing the replica, will do. But I got to figure out the exact offset, which is not that easy to figure out, you know, how to get the correct offset to run a 7 and 8 all round. Then I'll run out like a 225 Pirelli Trofeo R all round. And I think that'll change the characteristic of that car. Like right now, it needs a few things, and I just describe it as lazy, but I'm still engaged in it. You know, it's a relatively easy car to drive. It's not intimidating. You know, weirdly, an F40 is also not an intimidating car to drive, but the F40 is like, you know, a $2 million car. And, you know, the 408 GT4 Dino's, you know, not a $2 million car. So that's why the Ferrari, you know, I kind of have a soft spot for Ferraris, but I've always sort of owned like the entry-level ones, only because, you know, that's where I'm at. You know, I'd kind of want to test a Roadster, even though I hear they're not great. It wouldn't stop me from having one. But yet again, they're not affordable, really, or they're not entry level.
Yeah, because in the UK, if you drive around in, say, you know, when I'm driving my 912 or even my 911, my 996, they're tiny compared to a lot of the SUVs and things like that you're in traffic with. But if you're in that Ferrari, or if you're in a 70s, 60s 911, you must feel like the other drivers can't even see me. Surely.
Yeah, I mean, that was the ultimate problem with the 73 Lotus Europa. You know, it was 42 inches high. So you were under the mirror of every SUV. So nobody saw you. And that car didn't really have enough power to get out of its way. It was a momentum car. So it was kind of a bit, you couldn't slice and dice. You were always worried about literally someone running over you in it. The front is just a little bit bigger, but it's interesting you talk about size and scale, right? Because, you know, you talk about your 996 and your 912 and how small they seem. I'm surrounded by cars that seem small. Yeah, I mean, they don't seem small when you're in this garage, but when you got a 992 parked outside, you go, wow. 993, even one of my faves, this 996 GT3 that I've got right there, seems small compared to a modern 992. And it's like, it's also my pet peeve with all these modern super hypercar manufacturers. The cars have got all the power in the world that we've talked about you can't use. The cars are wider than they've ever been when the roads are getting narrower than they've ever been. The road surface in LA is not great anywhere. So it's almost like, you know, you're not really going too much faster in a 750 horsepower car than you are in your 200 horsepower car on your favorite road. Granted, yes, you are faster, but you're not like 3 times faster, 3 times the horsepower, right? Yep. You know, the road always determines the ultimate speed, you know, and if you can only do, you know, X, Y, Z on that road, doesn't really matter if you've got 200 horsepower or 1200. You might get there a little quicker with your 1200 horsepower, but that max speed is not going to be, you know, 50% quicker than it is in the other car.
Yeah.
So absolutely. To me, it's a lot of modern cars now just have power that's not usable. It's a performance package that's not obtainable unless you're on a racetrack. You know, it's a little bit like, you know, Porsche always talking about Nürburgring lap times, right? Well, how many of them really go to the Nürburgring?
Yeah, exactly. Because I recently drove a brand new Macan GTS, and because Marc challenged me to go and drive one, because I'm always down on SUVs. I just think, especially the ones they make really, really powerful. You know, why? Because it doesn't replace a sports car, and they make out that they do. And I drove one, and I took it back to the dealership, and I said, well, it just feels like any other car. You know, it was PDK. And the lady at the dealership turned to me and went, but that's what a 992 feels like. It drives like any other car. And you just think, well, why would I want that? I want the car to make me work. I want to know I've been beaten up when I get out of the car. And, you know, it's that kind of thing, that engagement that you go, that's the thing that I know I've been in something that's different. Whereas with the modern ones, it's not accessible power. You know, I went to Millbrook on Friday and I drove a Taycan and I did launch control. And in the space of 1 mile, I went from 0 to 158 to 40. And you go, when am I going to do that on the road? Never. Is the novelty of that going to wear out? It is.
I don't even get the point of launch control in that environment you just said, like the Taycan, right? I mean, how many people are using launch control in a Taycan in England on a public road?
No.
I mean,
it's dangerous.
What's the point? I mean, I drove the new GT3, and to me, it's too much of a race car for the street. You know, it's one of my pet peeves. It's got the same engine in it as that 600-mile 2019 Speedster that you saw, right? They haven't developed that platform of the internal combustion, naturally aspirated motor anymore. It's like they're maxed out on it, right? They're no longer developing that power plant because it's the same power plant as in the 2018, 2019 Speedster, which now is, how old is that technology, right? So they're making that car faster on a racetrack with all the RSR, front suspension, blah, blah, blah. But that actually makes it slower on a regular fucked up road because it's super guarded, you know, it's moving around and it's like this. Then you got the big wing in the back that's right at your eye level when you're trying to look in the rearview mirror to make a maneuver. And so it's almost like, well, quick around the ring, yeah, we get it, but in real world situation has no more power than the old 991. So of technology, you haven't advanced the drivetrain in that car, which to me is a little bit like it's saying a message, right? I'm sure they could develop it, but yeah, why are we going to spend money when we're phasing out internal combustion engines? You know, it's kind of the writing on the wall is there. Like, you made it quicker, but in real world situation, I don't really think you did. And it didn't become a better driving experience unless you're on the smoothest road surface. So to me, it's kind of like, where are we going, right? You know, are these things going to be a thing of the past in 5-10 years? Part of me goes, well, as long as we can still get oil and gasoline, we're still going to be driving internal combustion cars. They're not going to disappear overnight. You know, we've all driven electric cars, and yes, they're fast, but yeah, it always comes back to range, right? And where you're going to charge and how long is it going to take to charge? And, when you get to that charging station, does it work? And do you need to download a certain app? And is it a high-speed one? And is it where you want to be on your off-road trip to Moab where they're not really along the way? It's kind of a weird thing. I was down at Ajmal Island recently talking to a Porsche exec and asked him what car he drove down and asked him if he drove the Taycan. And he said he didn't drive the Taycan because there weren't enough charging stations between Atlanta and Ajmal Island on the way. I go, well, how's this Charge America thing working then if there's not, electric charging stations in every state on every corner, right? So still a long way for that technology to go. I guess in the end we'll get there. But, it's back to all these electric cars from every manufacturer. They're all big brutes, right? They're huge. Why is no one making a cool, small electric car? I don't see it here. Maybe in Europe it's different, but here I don't see it. Everything's a big 4-door with one person driving it.
Yeah, because I think the Honda made the Honda E. It's supposed to be one of the cool ones over here, but it's got really short range. I mean, less than 150 miles. But talking about electric cars, what's the next big thing for Magnus? What's the next thing that you're going to do? I know there's a big thing with the celebration of the 10 years from Urban Outlaw, and you've got the museum stuff happening. What are your plans for the future? Are you about to launch into something new, or is it more of the same, or change of direction?
Well, I'm all about the 2-door coupe, the Rolls. The new car fever is strong with that. I'm working on a couple of new show ideas. One's like, trying to find fish and chips. We spoke about that.
Yes.
And, I'm just trying to make cool shit with cool people and occupy my time in a constructive way. I feel like I'm on a little bit of a roll with the stuff I did with Haggerty, but that's still, ultimately there's another show I want to do, which it's just a matter of finding someone to do it with. It's a fine line for me between, shooting shit on your iPhone and then doing something that has a bit more production quality. Like season 3 of The Big Thing, I produced it myself. I brought the team in, and so I had full control over it. I realized how much work it is. Like shooting's the easy bit. The challenging bit is the edit, and then doing these historical packages and scoring music. And it just all takes time and energy, which ultimately means you got to, spend some money on it. And there comes a point where you sort of need to team up with someone who can finance you to go create stuff you want to create that's at a certain level, or you just go back to sticking GoPros on your car, which is not something I never actually did. I've done a lot of other people's shows, like I've done a lot of podcasts and a lot of interviews. So, I kind of know what I want to do and what I don't want to do. And it's just a matter of finding the right team or putting together the right team where I can, I've done a lot of cool stuff that I never documented. I go, why didn't I document that? I did Amelia, these drives I talk about across Australia and Colombia. Yeah, I never stuck a camera on any of those cars and created any, I guess you'd call it content, right? I was just in the moment doing it. And then you come back and go, oh, I guess I could have put some GoPros on and figured out how to edit a little film when I'm done, right? It's almost, I'm like a one-man army in the sense of I don't have a team with me. Believe it, people think there's a team behind me. It's just me and this iPhone. I think I'm at the point where I need to put together a little team of creatives where they can come along with me on these fun journeys, right? And actually document them. I drove up the hill at Goodwood in a Carrera GT and never even got any footage of it. And, part of me thinks I should ship one of my cars to Europe and do this European tour. I've gone to all these great events that Europe has. Goodwood Festival of Speed, Classic Le Mans, go to Spa, Old-Timer GP, and, create some driving memories there. But it's just a matter of putting it together. So I've got these ideas to do things like that. But
I'll come with you on all of those. I'll come with you on all of those.
There you go. I mean, how hard can it be, right? You stick a GoPro on and then figure out, how to edit and put it together.
Yeah, my 912 is not going to make it.
What's that?
My 912 is not going to make it.
Oh, your 996 will. I mean, the 912 will. What color is the 912?
It's blue. It's not the factory blue. It's not got matching numbers or anything, which kind of gives you a bit more freedom to do whatever you want with it.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm very much like that. It's got the old Hearts Fuchs on it, which are really tucked in, so the offset is really narrow. which I quite like, but I like the look with the steels with no caps as well, with the slightly deeper offset. So I don't really know what I want to do with it, but at the same time, it's got no seat belts. It's dogleg first. I'm driving it left-hand drive, so I can't overtake anything on a country lane. If I can ever build up enough momentum, that is, to go around us. But I love it. I love it. The smell, the heat, because at first I did not know that it was overheating. Okay. Because the temperature gauge didn't work. And the only way you knew it was overheating is because you felt the heat on the back of your head.
Oh, that's really,
driving. And it was all because the tinware was missing. So it's the tinware that creates the airflow. So I tons of it was missing. So I went and bought some more of it, changed the temperature gauge, and it runs much cooler, runs much better. I love being out in it. I love the noise it makes. And it's, it's kind of when you're really thrashing it, I think I'm going to redline it and it might explode, but it's kind of gives you that adrenaline rush and it's making your ears bleed, but I love it.
Yeah. It's engaging.
Yeah, absolutely.
All of that, and you're not even doing 80 miles an hour.
Exactly. That's it. It's on kilometers an hour, so I've got to work that out as well. I want to get a new gauge, but anyway, I've talked way too much. Sorry, Marc.
We should swap speedos. I've got an American 356 with miles per hour speedo. I
thought you were talking about the other kind of speedo.
No. Or the budgie smugglers.
Yeah, there you go. You got some Union Jack ones.
Oh God, no.
We're not swapping those speedos.
No speedos.
Yeah. I don't have any. I've rambled on. I've rambled on way too much. Sorry, Marc.
We've taken up a lot of your time today, Magnus, and we really appreciate you coming on.
It's been fun.
It has been fun. We've been some great insights to you that we haven't heard from other podcasts, which is quite nice.
Well, yeah, dare to be different, right?
Yeah, it's been great.
Well, absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity. And hopefully I get to meet you guys one of these days.
Yeah, well, perhaps somewhere in LA, we'll come knocking on the door.
Yeah, you're welcome anytime. If you find yourself out in Cali, in downtown LA, stop on by.
And when you come back, if you come to the UK,
I might be coming in the summer for my birthday. We were supposed to be there for Christmas, actually, and we bailed last minute when whatever the latest variant of COVID was sweeping through around Christmas. So hopefully my tickets are still valid and maybe there in the summer for my birthday. So I'll be trying to find some good fish and chips in Chef.
Oh, my God.
Sounds like you're more likely to find them there than you are in LA anyway.
Yeah, I think so. You're right about that. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to let myself go unless there's anything else you need.
Oh, great. Thank you very much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time, Magnus.
Have a great
one. Cheers, guys. It's been emotional.
Yeah, it's been.
Have a good one.
See ya.
Cheers.